All right, so there's a lot of chatter going on during this college football season and after the season concluded about the Big Ten being a better conference than the SEC. I will admit the Big Ten had some leverage in this argument based on how its teams performed in the college football playoff, and it can be argued as well that the top teams in the Big Ten were better than the top teams in the SEC in 2024. However, I can't completely subscribe to the claim that the Big Ten is a better conference in football than the SEC just yet. Given recent history, the past 5-10 years, the SEC has been dominant. Alabama, Georgia, LSU, and even to this day, there is a higher volume of quality teams in the SEC than there are in the Big Ten. There's a steep drop off in the Big Ten when it comes to the quality of teams from top to bottom. The drop off is not as steep in the SEC from top to bottom. That's neither here nor there, however. And I want this argument to be settled. And I've been brainstorming innovative ways for this to be done. I was inspired after the Four Nations tournaments about how this can be done in a creative and innovative way. And I drummed up the idea of an SEC Big Ten mashup. I think that this idea is a no-brainer and should be implemented as soon as possible. You want to talk something that will get people going, get people excited, get people engaged. The competition that would take place between the SEC and the Big Ten would be fierce because fans have been passionate about this. These arguments have been breaking out all year and continue to during this offseason. I've gotten in this argument several times. I'm not going to disclose which side I'm on, but I'm sure that you can put two and two together. I want to settle this shit. Outside of the CFP, which I would say was successful this year, but it's still a somewhat flawed system, and outside of these bowl games. A lot of people were using the outcomes of bowl games to justify the Big Ten being better than the SEC, and I think that's a flawed argument too, because a lot of guys opt out of those games in preparation for the draft. They want to avoid injury. There's one way to settle this SEC Big Ten argument, and it's to take it to the gridiron. Take it to the field, put your money where your mouth is. I want there to be an SEC Big Ten mashup that starts in 2026 and repeats itself in 2027. I want this to take place on week 2 of both those respective seasons, 2026 and 2027. That way you're optimizing the health of both teams since it's rather early in the season, being week 2, so there won't be many injuries just yet. And I want these to be home-and-home series where you play one game at one team's home and the game the following year at the other team's home. I drummed up 16 matchups for the SEC Big Ten mashup based on teams that I would say are in similar positions of each other. So, similar trajectories, similar aptitudes. I put these matchups together based on that, and of course, storylines, juicy storylines, and animosity as well, because that's what fuels the sport. So, the first matchup I have it all here on my handy-dandy phone. The first matchup that I would have is Georgia and Ohio State. I think this game needs to be revisited after the college football playoff matchup several years ago. It was an absolute classic, a barn burner between Georgia and Ohio State. And this game pains Ohio State fans deep because of the missed field goal at the end. Ohio State had a lead that they choked. Georgia came storming back in Atlanta, won the Peach Bowl, went to the national championship as a result. I think Ohio State fans feel bitter, and there's no love lost between these two teams based on how that game went. These are also two of college football's premier programs. I would consider them both to be blue bloods in college football right now. The standard is high. You could say that these are the top 2 programs in college football right now. They got to play each other home and home. I would love to see this. This one's intriguing. And as an Alabama fan and alumnus, I've wanted to see this one for a very long time. Alabama versus the Oregon Ducks. Fascinatingly enough, this matchup has never taken place in the history of college football. These two teams have never played each other. Two of college football's most notable brands have never faced off on the gridiron before. That needs to change. That matchup would be fascinating. Alabama fans going to Eugene, Oregon, and Oregon's finest in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. What a matchup that would be. I could imagine going to Ennis and just seeing Duck fans everywhere, or the Alamites. That would be insane. It's got to happen. Texas and Penn State. This is a weird matchup to conceptualize, but these are two excellent, well-coached programs right now, well-assembled programs right now that's, I think, on a very level playing fields. I would love to see them face off. I think that would be fascinating. This one right here is one of my favorites. Tennessee and Michigan. Tennessee, of course, has a positive trajectory right now. And Michigan, even though you could say they took a step back in 2024, it was predictable after losing Jim Harbaugh and a lot of the guys that made Michigan who they were in that championship run in 2023, lost them to the draft. You know, it makes sense why I took a step back in 2024. Sharon Moore's first year as a head coach. There's a lot of talent coming into Ann Arbor right now. And I think them facing off with Tennessee would be fantastic in 2026 and 2027. And think about this. In 2026 when they play, you'll be getting a matchup between Nico and Bryce Underwood. It would likely be Bryce Underwood's first year starting and Nico's third. Amazing quarterback matchup. I know everyone's going to love this one. Really drum this one up. South Carolina and Illinois. That Shane Beamer, Brett Bielema rematch. There's a lot of tension in that bowl game this year. You know, words exchanged between those coaches. And this would just be a fiery matchup. You know I love the smoke, and you would get the smoke in this game. I guarantee it. Ole Miss and Indiana. I just feel like those two match up well with each other. You could say Ole Miss may overpower Indiana, but I still think that when this game goes to Bloomington, it would be interesting. And then again, just two huge party schools. You got to think about that as well. These are two major party brands. They're on those Barstool rankings all the time, both these schools. Neither of them have ever lost a party, but one of them will undeniably lose the game when they play each other. Texas A&M and UCLA, the rematch of that classic, and I believe it was 2017, Josh Rosen. That was, those are very pleasant memories from my high school times watching that game, and I would love to see that matchup get rekindled. You've got an old school Big 12 matchup between Missouri and Nebraska. We'll be able to revisit that micro rivalry again, and I think that just based on where both those programs are right now, that would be a pretty even matchup. Florida and USC. Two iconic brands that all of us watching college football in the 2000s treasure a lot because the torch was essentially passed from USC to Florida. And so, in the mid-2000s. And so it would be cool to see these two brands take the field again. And again, I think they're in similar spots. I think Florida's a better team. I would take Florida to win both games, but I think both games would be electrifying. Arkansas and Minnesota, two teams that are kind of in the middle of the pack in their respective conferences, but both teams with a lot of potential. I'd love to see that matchup. I think it'll be really interesting. LSU and Wisconsin, last time they played in that bowl game a couple years ago, the Sparks flew, and I think the Sparks definitely fly if they take the gridiron again. Oklahoma and Iowa, what a barn burner this one would be. Two great defensive schools that have struggling, ailing offenses right now. Granted, Oklahoma's could be better with John Mateer, but we'll have to see how that looks. I could see this game being like 10-6. A real defensive slugfest, but if you're in that sort of thing, which I am, depending on the day, depending on how I feel in the day, what the mood is, I could really enjoy this game. Auburn and Washington. Washington kind of regulated themselves after that huge run to the national championship several years ago, or not that long ago, second thought. And Auburn, I think Auburn's improving as a program. When you have these two take the field, I think this could be a pretty even matchup. Vanderbilt and Michigan State. Michigan State is going to start to improve at any time here, and Vanderbilt is an improving program. I think this will be a fascinating matchup. Kentucky and Maryland's two teams that every year you feel like they're on the cusp of taking off, but they never really seem to. You never know when that could be. And so that's what makes this matchup mysterious. And come 2026, it could be marquee. And then Mississippi State and Rutgers. I mean, you could say those are... Rutgers has been ascending these past several years, but Mississippi State has been trying to regain their balance. But I thought I started to see the Bulldogs make some strides, and all you Hail Staters out there, I think bright times are to come. And by 2026, just like the Kentucky-Maryland game, this could be a fascinating game. There's more teams in the Big Ten than there are the SEC, so naturally I couldn't find a matchup for everybody. I had to leave Northwestern and Purdue out just because of how they've performed these past several years. I had to include the best of the best, so I deeply apologize to the fan base of the Wildcats and the Boilermakers. Maybe those trajectories will change in these years to come, but that's just what I had to do here. Let me know what you think of these matchups, and this needs to happen. For the health of the sport, this needs to happen. Leagues, sports innovates when you escalate the level of competition, and there is no denial. The level of competition would be multiplied here just because of the passion of the SEC and the Big Ten and the fact that both conferences think that they're the best. Let's duke it out on the field. Have a great day.